Uhuru na Nguvu.
No. You looking at a free black man.
Talk Black 360.
You want to know what a free black man look like? Look at me.
Uhuru na Nguvu. Welcome to another dose of Talk Black 360. I am your host, Tino Blaine King, the Kool-Aid and Kush, the pioneer of black pragmatism. Today I've got a very interesting show for you. Yesterday we covered some of the basics, and for the rest of this week, I think we're going to lay out some of the ideology of Talk Black 360. Some of the issues that we need to cover. Our mission is to just make sure that we're covering the issues that are causing separation inside of the liberation community. And if you don't consider yourself being inside of the liberation community, that's okay. Because as of right now, there is no membership to the liberation community. It is whether or not you see yourself as someone who wants to be engaged in the process of working towards black liberation. But having said that, Talk Black 360 today, we've got a very interesting topic for you. So one of the things that divides us is just simply our philosophies, our mindsets as it pertains to what is it that we're going to do and how are we going to address black liberation as it is compared to or as it is subjected to white supremacy. So I think a lot of our folk, a lot of our people get frustrated when we have these conversations about blackness and they want to say at some point we've got to just get past it. I definitely disagree with that wholeheartedly. I don't think there is a reality that involves getting past your race in a racially constructed society such as America is. So I would say that those people who feel that way are going to still have to get their Negro wake-up call. They're going to have to realize that, some things in this society are just not fair, they're not equal, and in most situations, they're stacked against people because of their race and the relationship of their race with white supremacy. Again, I always like to make a note that white supremacy is a system. It's not something that I advocate for people to look at, and to cast upon individuals. I will say that there are black people who represent white supremacy. I will say that there's many white people out there who are not cognizant of what white supremacy is and how it plays a role in society, because as we talked about yesterday, people tend to associate white supremacy with racism. And when you associate white supremacy with racism, it's easy for someone to say, what are you talking about? I'm not a racist, so therefore I don't support white supremacy. And, that's a whole different understanding. But anyway, let's dig into this topic today. So what we're going to talk about today, and the title of this podcast is Ain't Nobody Got Time for All That Black Stuff, right? All right, you know what I'm talking about. All right, I know you do. So we've all encountered, especially us who consider ourselves to be advocates inside of black liberation, inside of the revolution, those of us who are unapologetically black, however you want to call it, whatever the nomenclature is that you're going to use, we have all heard it before. Somebody who said, man, would you leave me alone? Because I ain't got time for all that black stuff. Why are they saying that? I think that's one of the things that we need to address. One of the reasons that someone would say that is because there's this thing going around, or has been going around for some time in the black community, that says you don't recognize your race or the problems that you have as black people until you get your Negro wake-up call, right? Your Negro wake-up call. And when you get that Negro wake-up call, then you begin to invest time, efforts, and energy into understanding what has taken place. And that Negro wake-up call then causes you to start to pay attention to black issues and racial issues. And then when you start to do that, then you observe some of the behaviors that exist inside of the Black Liberation Movement, and ultimately you come out in frustration, especially if you're a goal-oriented person. It can be very frustrating dealing with an oppressed people. So when you get that Negro wake-up call, then you begin to give your attention to what we're calling Black liberation or being unapologetically black. And you see some of these things and it frustrates you. I know I've seen some of our elders who's been involved in the movement for decades that are just at this point frustrated about some of the things that we do and how we carry on inside of this so-called Black liberation movement. And I think that when people from the outside, Negropeans or European-minded Negroes, I'll explain all of that later, but nevertheless, when these folk see how the movement of Black liberation actually plays itself out, then there becomes a frustration, a disinterest, in many cases, a disdain for Black liberation. And when they observe that, it would cause that statement to be made because they see it as being disorganized and unproductive. Another reason that you would get a statement like that being made is because we live in a society, in a world where there's so many obstacles, there's so many problems that we have to face. Remember when well, I'm sure you don't remember, but let's track back to a time when the basic necessities of life was food, clothing, and shelter. Well, guess what? That's no longer the world we live in, and life is no longer that simple. So when people look at just day-to-day life, they encounter all of these numerous problems. You've got education, you've got raising your children, you've got tax, fines, and fees from law enforcement. You've got bills, light bill, water bill, phone bill. Now you got internet, and you've got television and all of the services that you subscribe to online. You've got Netflix, and then you watching Roku and whatever, all of these services and things and problems are that you have to engage in just to survive in the society that we live in. And when you look at what we call Black liberation, and all you see is the introduction of more problems, it becomes burdensome and you don't want to deal with it. So that would cause a statement such as, ain't nobody got time for all that blacks, because you got other stuff, right? Until you get that Negro wake-up call. You remember we all I'm not gonna say we all, but I know I did, and it was a big thing when Jay-Z came out with the OJ song. And remember the first line in the OJ song, or at least in the first part of the OJ song, where you know what? I'll play it. It went like this.
OJ like, I'm not black, I'm OJ. Okay.
So in that first line, that embodies what the successful black person who's not seeing blackness or not seeing the world through a Black liberation worldview, that embodies how they begin to think. Race doesn't matter. That is the context of why someone would make a statement such as this, because they feel like there's a possibility to separate their day-to-day life from their race, not realizing that in this society, the whole context of the society, the whole structure of this society is race-based. So when we see or observe people making statements such as that, we should, as people of Black liberation, or people or having concern of Black liberation, we should meet this statement with a humility, to understand that the person making that statement just doesn't know any better. And it is incumbent upon us to at least try to reach out with some form of humility and respect, to give them an opportunity to explain what they mean in that context. So now, here we go. So one of the things, another thing that we should look at that cause people to make a statement such as, I ain't got time for all that black, is the observation of how the movement functions. And one of the things that I think people from the outside looking in will see inside of the movement is tumult, turmoil, chaos, infighting. You see, at any point where we get engaged in a conversation, we can't find commonality in our issues. We always hinge on the divisiveness. And I think, the divisiveness, however that word is pronounced. But anyway, we hinge on that, and it causes frustrations and it causes static amongst our people. And I think we need to acknowledge that that is happening, and people from the outside looking in see that, and they cast judgment on that behavior. So we should work to reverse, or at least to tamp down some of that behavior. But that behavior comes from something we talked about yesterday, which was information ego. A time back in the movement, as a process of us trying to tell our people that we didn't start in slavery. There was a phrase that was coined inside of the movement that went, we had to develop a knowledge of self. And a knowledge of self basically was a charge to get Black people to see that their beginnings were not slavery. It was knowledge of what we had done and what we had accomplished far before slavery was a factor. And knowledge of self is one of the phrases that has actually caused a lot of the contrast in our discussions. What do I mean by that? I want to lay it out by saying this. Look, history buffs and historians are not necessarily revolutionaries or soldiers. And in our elders and ancestors telling us that we had to gain knowledge of self, we produced a large group of history buffs, people who started to scratch the surface of the lies that we have been told in the process of assimilating us into America. And when they were able to find that information, they started to use that information not just to uplift our people, but to be punitive against our people, as if you don't know this, you don't understand Black people. And I hate that reality has been created. But when people from the outside looking into the movement see a lot of us arguing about our history, I think it becomes problematic. Yes, absolutely. Our history is important. We need to have knowledge of self. We need to learn our history. We need to learn about Nile Valley culture. We need to learn about the Ethiopian Empire. We need to learn about Mali and the Moors, and we need to learn, even about the Zulus and all of the things in history that that made us the people that we are. That's knowledge of self. But when you become a historian or a history buff and you begin to argue about the details of history, and that becomes the focus of a movement, anyone on the outside that is dealing with real life practical issues is going to observe that as being some black stuff. And I don't think that is where we should be today. Yes, there was a time for that, but it's time to set that aside. And we have to understand, look, I get this a lot, and I'm going to be honest with you. I know a lot about our history. I have a lot of knowledge of self, so to speak. I have enough knowledge of self to understand that I don't know nothing. I understand that every second of every day of every person's life, history is made. And for someone to get knowledge of a minute area in their history and begin to think that knowledge gives them a power over other folks who may not have that information, that's destructive. And I will not endorse, nor will I ever be a proponent of that type of behavior. When you get knowledge of our people and our history, it is simply to be shared. And there's no need for us to argue philosophies back and forth about our history. Share the knowledge, and if you're very interested in the truth, then a historian has a lifelong work. And it's as individual to our people as religion. Our history should empower us. We can find in history almost everything that we would want to say about black people. What do I mean? I mean, we can find a time when black people were prominent and caring in a space of history. And in the same time, but in a different space, we can find where black people were scoundrels. We can find where black people were totalitarians and abusive, not only to other people, but to their own people. So your history and your knowledge of self should carve out the person that you are so that you can project that into the world and so that you can share that in a positive way with those people who you love and care about. So what type of ego would a person have to have? Because they can recite, if you've read 100 books, you haven't scratched the surface of history. If you read 100,000 books, you haven't scratched the surface of history. So what type of ego would one have to try to impugn someone else with the information that they've uncovered? We're not going to do that here. And I get charged with not being specific enough. I don't have that type of ego. I know that there's a lot of things that I know, and I also know that there's a lot of things that I don't. And these situations cause conflict inside of the Black liberation movement and inside of our communities. So let's not do that. Let's point to the person who tries to abuse our people with information and call them wrong. And let's give them an opportunity to change their ways and change their behavior. But when someone who says, ain't nobody got time for all that blacks, they may have observed that. And that might be a reason why they would make such a statement. So to move forward, I want to make sure that I'm covering most of the things that I wanted to cover in this, because I want to definitely lay out that there's a reason people make those statements. I want to lay out some of the reasons they make the statement, but then I want to give us a solution to the problem. So lastly, I'm going to give you a reason or another reason why people would make that statement. There is a mindset of black people, or some black people in America, that this social construct that we call America, this country, the ideals of America, is actually designed to work for all people and to make the lives of all people better. I want to be clear. The founding fathers of the United States of America had no concern for black people or slaves at the time. And I make that statement not based on having been there and having observed the arguments that they had to construct the documents, but I make that statement based on the fact that there was a people who were enslaved at the time that just were not considered humans. So if you have a document that is constructed for a people, but there's a group of people that are present that you're not considering human, I can make the statement that the founding fathers had no regard for black people. That's not a judgment, and I really don't care that that is what it was. What I care about is to acknowledge that and to make sure that there is never another time in the world that a people can disregard us as black people. So that is one of the reasons why we push forward inside of this thing we call black liberation. That is one of the reasons why I'm unapologetically black, because there was a time in history when the group of people thought to construct something that was believed to be the greatest document to ever reach civilization, but had disregard for my ancestors. And with that knowledge of self, I make my stance in society felt. But understand something. That is my personal feelings. There is a group of black people who do not share those feelings. And I'm okay with that. But I want to at least do a proper representation of what the alternative thought process of black people might be. Although, and this is the alternative, although we weren't considered in the documents of what America calls their founding fathers, what we know to be the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, although we understand that we were not considered there is a belief that that document was written in the way that it was written so that we can eventually be brought into the fold. And I would say that the spirit of that document does not do that. I would say that the spirit of that document did exactly what it intended to do. It excluded us and it provided a pathway for those who were considered at that time the people of America. It provided a pathway for them to move forward. Even when Lincoln said, if I could save the Union and free some of the slaves, I would. If I could save the Union, free all of the slaves, I would. If I could save the Union and free none of the slaves, I would. And that's not the exact words verbatim, but it's the context. It shows you that the spirit of America has no regard for the spirit of Black people. In knowledge of self, we have a spirit that comes before America. And we have to be sure that in our actions, we are concerning ourselves with our people. And in properly concerning ourselves with our people, we will then be able to negotiate our position inside of America. But there is no more importance than us being able to negotiate our position as Black people first. There is nothing more important, than us being able to negotiate our position as Black people first, before, or at least at the same time, of us engaging or dealing with our position in America. So all of that is said so that I can make this point. There is a group of Black people who believe that our best way forward is through assimilation, and that by some miracle of white benevolence, we're going to gain equality in this system. America is an economic-based society. It's all about the money. It is about rich, privileged people. As Farrakhan said, this country is about rich and privileged people, and the poor people must serve. The relationship between America and Black people has been one of much turmoil and much destruction, largely borne by our people. And there have been good people inside of the system who has tried to provide for more opportunity for Black people without destroying the foundation of the forefathers who created this country, this society that we live in. But for Black people, and I will say this, to believe that our path forward has to be hinged upon the benevolence of white people giving us something, or even standing up to the words that of their promise. There's no promise that America will make that will weaken its position. And unfortunately, some of the promises that America has made, Black people was just simply excluded from. So for Black people to believe that America, by some act of benevolence, is going to repair us, I believe is a foolish understanding. However, I do acknowledge that a lot of Black people feel that way. So one of the reasons that a Black person would make a statement such as, ain't nobody got time for all that Black stuff. One of the reasons is because They believe in the promise of America. And I happen to believe the words of Brother Farrakhan said. When he said this,
If you have made a promise that you don't keep, what are you? You are a liar. Did they promise the Native Americans? Did they write it in treaties? Did they fulfill it? Did they promise us 40 acres and a mule? Did they fulfill it? Brown versus the Board of Education. 50 years later, where's the promise? Is it fulfilled, or are we still in segregated schools? The right to vote, you got it? But the minute they gave it to you, they were finding ways to take it back from you. Can't you open your eyes and see the house is burning?
Yes, Farrakhan's words were harsh, but his words were true. If someone promises you something and they do not deliver, they are a liar. It's simple. And America has proven to us time and time again that she will lie. So, I do not have a disdain for America because there's a separate reality that exists inside of this country that we live in. But for us as black people, we have our own reality that we should be willing to develop, preserve, and allow to have prosper without having a disdain for America. The best way to defeat white supremacy is by building black liberation. I can't look at myself as an American through the same lens that white folks look at themselves as American. It would just be foolish. But having said all of that, for our black people who think that through assimilation and through the process of America, we're going to solve black issues, in my opinion, you're wrong. But I'm a rational man. I'm a pragmatist. I'm willing to listen. But I'm not a fool. And I do believe when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them. And I think some of our people get into that mindset of believing in the promise of America because they just feel hopeless and powerless to do anything different. So as we develop more conversation about black liberation, we'll be able to address that. We'll be able to address it properly. I'm running very short on time, so I want to give you some last words. The way we're going to address these issues and the way that we're going to get to the bottom of building black liberation is through what you've heard me call the pragmatic process. And personally, I want you to understand that I am a black pragmatist. Now, what is a black pragmatist? Yes, I concocted the concept of a black pragmatist and black pragmatism. But let me just read that to you, or read some of this definition to you of black pragmatism. So first, let's start up with how I concocted the philosophy. In pragmatism, results matter. So we should not readily throw things from the table. We should bring everything to the table, implement those things that we're able to implement, and then value those things by the results that they produce. So pragmatism, by definition, is an approach that assesses the truth of meaning of theories or beliefs in terms of the success of their practical application. That's pragmatism. Now let's talk about black. What is black? I've heard so many people say black has no social status, it has no legal bearing, and okay, whatever. Black is a social construct. It is something that is relevant because it is accepted, received, and understood by the social or by the society that we live in. So let me give you a definition. Black, a social construct that society places on people who are largely believed to be of African descent and whose ancestors has suffered the atrocity of slavery or the Ma'afa. So with saying that, that gives us some context to when we say black. Now, it is understood in society that black is not a legal term. At least those of us who are learned understands that. But we can't negate the reality that people recognize what you are saying when you say black. All right. I hope that I've gotten this point across today. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Please share the video, share the podcast, leave some comments down below. I'll try to get to as many comments as I possibly can. I want to hear your thoughts and your feedback. I do want to have more of an interactive podcast in the future as we begin to produce some resources to be able to upgrade our technology. We'll definitely start doing that. But please share the video, like the page, tell your friends about it, comment, and all of those things. You can catch us on Facebook, of course, at Talk Black 360. We'll be posting the videos of the podcast on YouTube. And in the next couple days, the website should be up, talkblack360.com. Until then, stay strong and stay black. Ashe?
This has been another dose of Talk Black 360.
No, no, no. You will never be enslaved again by no man.